In the vast, silent expanse of the American desert, where the asphalt ribbon of Highway 17 stretches into an eternity of darkness, there exists a legend whispered among long-haul truckers and isolated desert dwellers. A tale of a road that doesn't just lead to a destination, but to a confrontation with your deepest fears. Tonight, we delve into the chilling saga of the Endless Highway haunting, a story so unsettling, it will make you question every shadow, every distant light, and every sound that echoes in the dead of night. Are you ready to face what lurks beyond the headlights? Because once you start this journey, there's no turning back. The rhythmic hum of the diesel engine was John's only companion, a constant drone against the oppressive silence of the desert night. Mile after mile, the white lines blurred into a hypnotic trance, pulling him deeper into the heart of nowhere. His rig, a weathered beast of chrome and steel, cut a solitary path through the inky blackness, its powerful headlights carving a tunnel of light through the impenetrable gloom. Inside the cab, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the faint, metallic tang of diesel. John, a man whose face was etched with the weariness of 1,000 highways, stared ahead, his eyes fixed on the vanishing point where the road met the horizon. He was a man of few words, his thoughts his own, but tonight, even his silence felt heavy, burdened by the ghosts of his past. The highway, a desolate artery through the heart of the American Southwest, was his sanctuary and his prison, a place where the miles melted away, but the memories clung like desert dust. He reached for the worn photograph tucked into the sun visor, his thumb tracing the smiling faces of a woman and a young girl, Sarah and Lily. His world, once vibrant and full of laughter, reduced to a faded image. Another night, another 1,000 miles, Sarah, he murmured, his voice a gravelly whisper against the engine's roar, a sound swallowed by the vast emptiness. Wish you were here, kiddo. This road, it gets lonely, so damn lonely. A pang of an old, familiar ache tightened his chest, a vice-like grip that never truly loosened. The road had been his escape, his penance, ever since the accident, the day his life shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He quickly tucked the photo away, the brief moment of raw vulnerability replaced by the hardened mask he wore for the world and for himself. He couldn't afford to break, not out here, not now. The desert stretched endlessly on either side, a vast, featureless expanse of scrub brush and rock, swallowed by the night. The moon, a sliver of silver in the velvet sky, offered little illumination, leaving the world beyond his headlights to the imagination, to the whispers of the wind and the shadows that danced on the periphery of his vision. It was the kind of night where shadows played tricks, where the wind whispered secrets that sounded suspiciously like names, and where every distant glint of light could be anything or nothing at all. John had seen it all in his years on the road, mirages shimmering on the asphalt, strange lights dancing in the sky that defied explanation, animals darting across his path with unnerving speed. He was a pragmatist, a man who believed only in what he could see and touch, in the tangible reality of the road beneath his wheels. But tonight, something felt different. A subtle shift in the air, a prickle on the back of his neck that had nothing to do with the desert chill. It was a premonition, a cold dread that seeped into his bones, a feeling he couldn't shake. Then he saw it, a flicker, just a momentary distortion in the darkness ahead, like a ripple in still water, a glitch in the fabric of reality. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and squinted, his vision blurring with fatigue. Nothing, just the endless road, stretching into the black abyss. He dismissed it as fatigue, another trick of the light, a phantom born of too many hours behind the wheel. He'd been driving for hours, pushing himself, as always, chasing the horizon, chasing a peace he could never quite grasp. He reached for his thermos, taking a long, desperate swig of the bitter, lukewarm coffee, hoping the caffeine would cut through the growing unease, the creeping sense of wrongness that was beginning to settle over him. A few miles later, it happened again. This time, clearer, undeniable. A figure, standing by the side of the road, bathed in the brief, stark glare of his headlights. A woman. She was dressed in what looked like a tattered, flowing white dress, her hair long and dark, obscuring her face, a veil of sorrow. She stood motionless, one arm outstretched, her thumb pointed towards him in the universal sign of a hitchhiker. John's foot instinctively eased off the accelerator, the rig's powerful engine groaning in protest. He rarely picked up hitchhikers, especially not out here in the middle of nowhere, where the nearest town was 100 miles back and the next was even further. But there was something about her, a vulnerability, a desperation that tugged at something deep within him, a forgotten chord of compassion. He slowed the rig, his mind warring with itself. The logical part of him screamed danger, isolation, trouble, a trap waiting to spring. The other part, the part that still carried the weight of his past, the ghost of Sarah and Lily, felt a flicker of empathy, a desperate need to help, to atone. He was almost abreast of her now. He could make out the faint outline of her face, or what he thought was her face, still obscured by her hair, a dark curtain against the pale fabric of her dress. He was about to pull over, to offer a ride, to break the oppressive silence with a simple act of kindness, when a sudden, inexplicable wave of dread washed over him. It wasn't just unease anymore. It was a cold, primal fear that clawed at his gut, a terror that transcended logic. Every instinct screamed at him to keep going, to not stop, to not look back, to flee. He pressed the accelerator, the powerful engine roaring back to life with a defiant growl, and sped past her, leaving her a ghostly silhouette in his rearview mirror. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He just kept driving, the image of her standing there. A ghostly sentinel in the darkness, burned into his mind, a haunting tableau against the endless black. He drove for what felt like an eternity, the silence in the cab now amplified by the pounding of his heart, a frantic drumbeat against the steel of his chest. He tried to rationalize it, to dismiss it as a hallucination, a product of his overactive imagination and sleep deprivation, a trick of the mind in the desolate landscape. But the feeling persisted, a cold knot in his stomach, a tightening in his throat. He glanced at his passenger seat, a fleeting, almost imperceptible movement, a nervous tick, and then his blood ran cold. For a split second, he saw her, the woman in white, sitting in his passenger seat. Her head was bowed, her long, dark hair still obscuring her face, a silent, spectral passenger. He slammed on the brakes, the rig shuddering violently, tires squealing against the asphalt, a desperate cry in the night. He whipped his head around, his breath catching in his throat, his eyes wide with terror. Empty. The seat was empty. Just the worn leather, the faint scent of stale coffee, the lingering chill of an unseen presence. He blinked, rubbed his eyes again, his hands trembling on the steering wheel, a tremor that ran through his entire body. Was he losing his mind? Was the loneliness finally getting to him? Was this highway, this endless, desolate stretch of road, finally breaking him? All right, that's it. Too much coffee, or not enough? I can never tell these days, John muttered to himself, his voice a shaky whisper, a desperate attempt to inject a dose of humor into the terrifying situation, to ground himself in some semblance of normalcy. He even managed a weak, humorless chuckle, a sound that died in the oppressive silence. Maybe I should just pull over and get some shut-eye. This is getting ridiculous. I'm talking to myself, seeing ghosts. Next thing you know, I'll be asking the steering wheel for directions. He reached for the radio, hoping to find some late-night talk show, some crackle of human connection, anything to break the oppressive silence and the unsettling thoughts swirling in his head. He turned the dial, but all he got was static. Just a hiss and a crackle, like 1,000 tiny voices whispering secrets he couldn't quite decipher, a chorus of unseen entities. He tried another station, then another, frantically spinning the dial. Nothing, just the endless, maddening static, a white noise that seemed to hum with a malevolent energy. He sighed, frustrated, a sound that was more a groan of despair, and reached for the CB radio, his last lifeline to the outside world. Breaker, breaker, any ears on the highway? This is Big John, westbound on 17. Anyone out there? Come on, somebody, anybody. He waited, listening to the familiar squelch of the channel, the comforting sound of human communication. A moment of silence, then a faint, distorted whisper. It wasn't words, not exactly. More like a jumble of sounds, a cacophony of sighs and moans, punctuated by what sounded eerily like his name. John, John, you're lost, John. The voice was raspy, ancient, and filled with an unspeakable sorrow, a chilling lament that seemed to echo from the very depths of the desert. He snatched his hand away from the microphone as if it had burned him, his skin crawling. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This wasn't static. This wasn't a prank. This was something else entirely. Something that knew him. Something that wanted him. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, his hands slick with sweat, and pressed harder on the accelerator. He needed to get out of here. He needed to find a truck stop, a diner, any sign of civilization, any place where the shadows couldn't reach him. The desert, once a comforting expanse of solitude, now felt like a vast, predatory maw, its darkness alive with unseen horrors, ready to swallow him whole. He kept checking his rearview mirror, his eyes darting from side to side, a desperate dance of fear. The road behind him was empty, a black void stretching into infinity, a path to nowhere. But then, in the distance, two pinpricks of light appeared. Headlights, approaching fast, too fast. He watched them grow, rapidly closing the distance, a pair of malevolent eyes in the darkness. It was an old car, he could tell even from this far away. Classic, a muscle car, perhaps from the 60s or 70s. The kind you only saw in car shows or old movies, a relic from a bygone era, now resurrected for a terrifying purpose. The car was on him in an instant, its engine roaring, a primal scream in the night that drowned out the hum of his own rig. It was a beat-up, rusted-out Ford Mustang, its paint faded and peeling, its chrome dulled by time and neglect. But it moved with a terrifying speed, tailgating him so closely he could see the distorted reflection of his own headlights in its grimy windshield, a distorted image of his own fear. The driver was a blur, a shadowy figure behind the wheel, indistinct, yet undeniably present. John tried to shake it, speeding up, pushing his rig to his limits, but the Mustang matched his pace, staying glued to his bumper, a relentless predator. He swerved, trying to force it to pass, to break free from its terrifying pursuit. But it stayed right there, a dark shadow, a malevolent twin. He could feel the heat of its engine, the vibration of its roar, even through the thick walls of his cab, a low thrum that resonated in his bones. This wasn't just an aggressive driver. This was something else, something malevolent, something that wanted him off the road, permanently. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the Mustang veered off the road, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel, a ghostly apparition vanishing into the darkness. John slammed on his brakes, the rig skidding slightly before coming to a halt, a desperate gasp for air. He peered into the dust cloud, his breath held tight in his chest, his heart pounding like a drum. Nothing, just the settling dust, the silence of the desert, broken only by the frantic beating of his own heart. He waited, heart pounding, for it to reappear, for the roar of its engine to shatter the night, for the glowing red eyes to return. But there was nothing, just the wind, whistling through the empty expanse, a mournful dirge. "Nope, not today, Satan. I've got a delivery to make, and I'm pretty sure you're not on the manifest," he mumbled, his voice a strained whisper, trying to lighten the mood, even if only for himself. He even started singing, a terrible, off-key rendition of Bon Jovi's "Livin' on a Prayer," his voice cracking on the high notes, a desperate, pathetic attempt to drown out the fear, to reclaim some semblance of control over his own sanity. He continued driving, the Mustang incident a fresh scar on his already frayed nerves, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces at play. The road remained empty, a desolate ribbon of asphalt, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, intensified with every mile, a suffocating presence that clung to him like a shroud. He passed a derelict roadside diner, its neon sign, long dead, creaking mournfully in the wind, a skeletal finger pointing to a forgotten past. The windows were boarded up, the paint peeling, a monument to forgotten dreams, a tombstone for lost hopes. As his headlights swept across the decaying facade, he thought he saw movement inside. Figures, shadowy and indistinct, moving behind the grimy windows, like ghosts trapped in a forgotten time. He slowed down, his eyes straining to see, to discern reality from illusion. Was it just the wind? The shadows playing tricks? He couldn't be sure. The place was clearly abandoned, a ghost of a bygone era. Yet the image of those fleeting figures lingered, an unsettling question mark in the back of his mind, a seed of doubt planted deep within his soul. He pressed on, the silence of the desert broken only by the hum of his engine and the frantic beating of his own heart. The air grew colder, a bone-chilling cold that seeped into the cab, despite the heater blasting, a frigid embrace that promised no comfort. He shivered, pulling his jacket tighter around him, but the cold was internal, a fear that had taken root deep within him. He was tired, so tired, his eyelids heavy, his body screaming for rest. He needed to stop, but every fiber of his being screamed at him to keep going, to outrun whatever was out there, to escape the clutches of this haunted highway. He glanced at the fuel gauge, almost empty. He cursed under his breath, a guttural sound of frustration and despair. He should have filled up at the last town, but he'd been in a hurry, pushing himself, always chasing the next mile, the next destination, the next fleeting moment of peace. The engine coughed, once, twice, a dry, rasping sound that sent a jolt of pure terror through him. John's eyes widened in alarm, his breath caught in his throat. He pressed the accelerator, but the rig only lurched forward, then sputtered again, a dying gasp. The engine light flickered, then died, plunging the cab into an even deeper darkness. The hum of the diesel engine faded into a groan, then a wheeze, and finally, a chilling silence. The truck rolled to a stop, its momentum carrying it a few more feet before it settled. A silent, hulking mass in the middle of the endless highway, a tombstone on the asphalt. The headlights, once a beacon of safety, a shield against the darkness, flickered, then extinguished, plunging him into absolute, suffocating darkness. The silence of the desert was no longer just oppressive. It was deafening, a vast, echoing void that seemed to swallow every sound, every thought, every last shred of hope. He was stranded, alone, in the middle of nowhere, and the night was just beginning. He fumbled for his flashlight, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it. The beam cut a shaky circle through the darkness, illuminating the dusty interior of the cab, the familiar objects now imbued with a sinister aura. He tried the ignition again, turning the key, a desperate prayer on his lips, but all he got was a pathetic click, a mocking echo of his helplessness. Dead, completely dead. He leaned back against the seat, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his chest heaving. This was it. He was truly alone. The cold seeped into his bones, a different kind of cold now, one that had nothing to do with the desert air. It was the cold of fear, of isolation, of utter helplessness. A cold that promised no warmth, no comfort, no escape. Then he heard it. Faint at first, a delicate, almost ethereal sound, carried on the wind. A child's laughter. It was light, innocent, and utterly terrifying in the desolate silence. A sound that twisted his gut into a knot of pure dread. It seemed to come from just outside his cab, a playful giggle that sent shivers down his spine, a cold tendril of fear snaking its way up his back. He froze, straining his ears, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. A drum solo of terror. There it was again, closer this time. He slowly, cautiously, turned his head towards the passenger window, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. His breath hitched. A small, shadowy figure stood on the side of the road, just beyond the reach of his flashlight's beam. It was small, no taller than a child, its form indistinct, a wavering shadow against the blackness. and it was beckoning to him. A tiny hand, waving him closer, inviting him into the darkness, into the unknown. The laughter echoed again, a chilling symphony in the night, a lullaby of terror. He stared, transfixed, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to break free from the terrifying spell. The endless highway had finally claimed him, and the night, he knew with a chilling certainty, was just beginning. The real horror he suspected was yet to unfold. He was merely at the threshold, and the door had just creaked open. The child's laughter, a sound that should have been innocent and joyful, instead resonated with a chilling, unnatural glee. It was a sound that burrowed deep into John's bones, freezing him in place, a cold dread that paralyzed his every muscle. He stared at the shadowy figure, his mind screaming at him to move, to do something, anything, to break free from the terrifying tableau. But his limbs felt heavy, rooted to the spot, as if an invisible weight pressed down upon him. The figure beckoned again, its small hand a pale blur against the oppressive darkness, a silent invitation to an unknown horror. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, vanished. The laughter, however, lingered, a phantom echo in the vast, silent desert, a haunting melody that played on the strings of his fear. John finally broke free from his paralysis, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his chest heaving with the effort. He fumbled for the door handle, his fingers clumsy with fear, and threw open the cab door, a desperate attempt to escape the confines of his truck, which now felt like a coffin. He stumbled out, his eyes darting frantically into the darkness, searching for any sign of the apparition, any clue to its existence. Nothing, just the endless, empty highway, stretching into the blackness like a forgotten scar, a wound on the face of the earth. The silence that followed the laughter was even more terrifying, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on him, stealing the air from his lungs. He was truly alone now, stranded in the heart of nowhere, with only the chilling echoes of a child's laughter for company, a constant reminder of the unseen horrors that surrounded him. He walked to the front of the truck, his flashlight beam cutting a shaky path through the gloom, illuminating the dusty asphalt and the barren landscape. He peered under the hood, his knowledge of engines rudimentary at best, a desperate hope that he might stumble upon a solution. Wires, hoses, metal, all looked normal, yet the engine remained stubbornly silent, a dead heart in a hulking beast. The air around him grew unnaturally cold, a biting chill that seemed to emanate from the ground itself, seeping into his very bones. He shivered, pulling his thin jacket tighter around him, but it offered no warmth against the supernatural cold. It wasn't just the desert cold. It was a cold that felt ancient, malevolent, a cold that seeped into his very soul, a harbinger of something truly sinister. He felt it then, a distinct sensation of being watched, a prickle on the back of his neck that had nothing to do with the desert chill. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He spun around, his flashlight beam sweeping across the desolate landscape, searching for the source of the unseen gaze. Nothing, just the endless expanse of sand and rock, bathed in the faint, ghostly glow of the distant moon, a silent witness to his terror. Then he heard it. Footsteps, a soft, rhythmic crunching in the gravel behind him, a sound that was too distinct, too deliberate to be the wind. He whirled around, his heart leaping into his throat, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The flashlight beam danced wildly, searching, desperate for something, anything, to explain the sound, to give form to the formless. But there was nothing. The footsteps stopped as abruptly as they had begun, leaving him in a terrifying silence. He stood there, frozen, listening, his ears straining against the silence, trying to discern the faintest whisper, the slightest movement. The wind whispered through the scrub brush, a mournful sigh, a sound that seemed to mock his fear. Was it just his imagination, the product of a mind pushed to its limits by fear and exhaustion? He wanted to believe it, to rationalize it away, to dismiss it as a hallucination. But the cold, the feeling of being watched, the phantom footsteps, they were too real, too visceral to be dismissed. too terrifying to be ignored. He scrambled back into the cab, slamming the door shut with a desperate finality, as if the thin metal and glass could offer any protection against the unseen horrors lurking outside. He fumbled for the CB radio, his hands trembling so violently he almost dropped it. He needed to hear a human voice, any human voice, a lifeline to sanity in this terrifying wilderness. He flipped the switch, and the familiar squelch filled the cab, a welcome sound in the oppressive silence. He waited, listening intently, his breath held tight in his chest. And then, a voice, clearer this time, less distorted than before, a beacon in the darkness. A woman's voice, soft, pleading, filled with a desperate urgency that resonated with his own fear. "Hello? Is anyone out there? My car, it broke down. I'm with my child. Please, we need help." John's breath hitched. A child. The word hung in the air, a cruel echo of his own past, a painful reminder of Lily. He gripped the microphone, his knuckles white, his mind racing. He had to help them. He had to. "This is Big John, westbound on 17. Where are you, ma'am? What's your 20? He waited, his heart pounding, a desperate hope flickering within him. The woman's voice returned, a little stronger this time, but still laced with fear, a fragile thread of sound. I don't know. We're just off the highway. I can see a big rig. Your lights? Are you close?" An eerie familiarity washed over John. The woman's voice, the mention of a child, the broken-down car. It stirred a painful memory, a phantom ache in his chest, a chilling echo of the accident that had stolen his family. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog of fear and exhaustion, to separate reality from the haunting echoes of his past. "I'm stranded too, ma'am. My rig's dead, but I can try to get to you. Can you give me any landmarks? Anything?" The woman's voice faded, replaced by a crackle of static, a sudden, jarring silence. Then, a child's cry, faint and distant, followed by the woman's voice, now barely a whisper, filled with a new, terrifying urgency. He's here. He's coming for us." The line went dead, just static. John slammed his fist on the dashboard, a guttural cry of frustration and despair escaping his lips. He had to help them. He had to. But how? His truck was dead, and the desert was a vast, unforgiving wilderness, a place where help was a distant, impossible dream. He looked out the windshield, his eyes scanning the darkness, a desperate hope that he might see some sign of them, some flicker of light. And then he saw it, the muscle car, the beat-up Ford Mustang. It was parked on the side of the road, a few hundred yards ahead, its dark silhouette stark against the faint glow of the rising moon, a silent, menacing presence. The driver's side door was open, a dark void in the side of the car, an open maw waiting to swallow him whole. And slumped over the steering wheel, a figure. John's blood ran cold. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was no ordinary car, no ordinary driver. This was the same car that had tailgated him, the same malevolent presence that had haunted him earlier, now waiting, watching, a silent predator. He watched, transfixed, as the slumped figure slowly, agonizingly, lifted its head. It turned, its gaze seemingly fixed on John's rig, a silent, unblinking stare. It had no face, just a smooth, featureless expanse where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. A terrifying, blank canvas of horror, a void that seemed to absorb all light, all hope. John recoiled, pressing himself back against the seat, his breath caught in his throat, a silent scream trapped in his chest. The faceless figure remained motionless, staring, its presence a palpable weight in the oppressive silence, a suffocating dread that filled the cab. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing it to disappear, to be a figment of his imagination, a cruel trick of his exhausted mind. When he opened them again, it was still there, a silent, terrifying sentinel in the desert night, a monument to his growing fear. "Nope, not today, Satan. I've got a delivery to make, and I'm pretty sure you're not on the manifest," John mumbled, his voice a shaky whisper. a desperate attempt to inject some humor into the terrifying situation, to regain some semblance of control. He reached under his seat, pulling out a worn-out comic book, a tattered copy of an old superhero adventure, its pages dog-eared and faded. He flipped it open, trying to focus on the colorful panels, the simplistic dialogue, anything to distract himself from the horror outside, to escape into a world where good always triumphed over evil. But the words on the page seemed to swim, to rearrange themselves into taunting messages. "You're next, John. You're next. You can't escape." He slammed the comic book shut, his hands trembling, his last refuge invaded. Even his escape, his small comfort, was being twisted against him, turned into another instrument of his torment. The temperature inside the cab plummeted. Frost began to form on the inside of the windshield, delicate, icy tendrils spreading across the glass, obscuring his view of the terrifying outside world. John could see his breath, a ghostly plume in the frigid air, a visible manifestation of the cold that permeated his very being. He shivered violently, his teeth chattering, his body racked with uncontrollable tremors. He pulled his jacket tighter, but it offered no warmth against the supernatural cold. It wasn't just the desert cold. It was a cold that felt ancient, malevolent, a cold that seeped into his very soul, a chilling embrace that promised no comfort, only despair. And then he felt it, a cold, invisible hand resting on his shoulder. It was heavy, possessive, its icy grip seeping through his jacket, through his shirt, directly onto his skin, a touch that burned with an unnatural cold. He froze, every muscle in his body tensed, his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steel of his chest. He didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe, didn't dare acknowledge the unseen presence. He could feel its presence, a malevolent entity, standing right behind him, its cold breath on his neck, a chilling caress that promised only death. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the terror, to make it go away, to wish himself back into the mundane reality of a long-haul truck driver. He thought of Sarah, of Lily, their faces smiling in the photograph, a desperate attempt to cling to the warmth of their memory. He thought of warmth, of sunlight, of anything but this suffocating cold and the unseen presence that clung to him like a shroud. He opened his eyes, and the hand was gone. The cold, however, remained, a lingering chill that permeated every inch of the cab, a constant reminder of the horror he had just endured. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the empty space behind him. Nothing, just the dark, silent interior of his truck, a silent witness to his torment. He was losing his mind. He had to be. This wasn't real, couldn't be. But the cold, the fear, the echoes of laughter and voices, they were all too real, too visceral to be dismissed as mere hallucinations. Suddenly, the CB radio crackled to life again. John jumped, startled, his hand flying to his chest, his heart leaping into his throat. He braced himself for the woman's voice, for her pleas for help, for another agonizing reminder of his inability to save them. But it wasn't her. It was a man's voice, deep, menacing, a voice that seemed to vibrate with ancient malice, a sound that resonated with the very essence of evil. "She's not the one you should be worried about, Johnny. You're the one who's lost." The words hung in the air, a chilling pronouncement, a direct threat, a declaration of ownership. John's blood ran cold. This entity knew him. It knew his name. It knew his past. It was playing with him, toying with his fears, his guilt, his deepest vulnerabilities. It was a predator, and he was its prey. Before he could even process the words, before he could formulate a response, the truck erupted into chaos. The interior lights, the dashboard lights, the powerful headlights all began to flicker violently, strobing in a blinding, disorienting rhythm, a terrifying light show that assaulted his senses. The horn, without warning, let out a deafening blast, a sustained, ear-splitting shriek that echoed across the desolate landscape, a primal scream tearing through the night, a siren of terror. It blared uncontrollably, a relentless, maddening shriek that vibrated through his very bones, shaking him to his core. John clapped his hands over his ears, but the sound penetrated, a physical assault that threatened to shatter his eardrums. The truck was alive, possessed, a monstrous entity turning against him, its own systems weaponized. He was trapped, a prisoner in his own rig, at the mercy of an unseen force that reveled in his torment, that fed on his fear. The horn continued to blare, a relentless, maddening shriek, echoing into the vast, indifferent darkness of the endless highway. And John, alone in the cacophony, knew with a terrifying certainty that the night was far from over. The true horror, he realized, had only just begun. He was caught in a dance with death, and the music was a symphony of his own despair. The deafening blare of the horn ceased as abruptly as it had begun, plunging John back into a silence that felt even more profound than before. The flickering lights stabilized, then extinguished, leaving him in an oppressive darkness broken only by the faint, distant glow of the moon. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the lingering echo of the menacing voice from the CB. "She's not the one you should be worried about, Johnny. You're the one who's lost." The words resonated in his mind, a chilling pronouncement that stripped away any remaining pretense of this being a random haunting. This entity, whatever it was, knew him. It was personal, and it was here to torment him, to peel back the layers of his carefully constructed defenses and expose the raw, bleeding wounds beneath. He fumbled for his flashlight, his hands still trembling, and switched it on. The beam cut a shaky circle through the darkness, illuminating the dusty interior of the cab, the familiar objects now imbued with a sinister aura, as if the very air was thick with malevolence. He tried the ignition again, a desperate, futile gesture, turning the key with a prayer on his lips. Nothing. The truck remained a silent, inert behemoth, a monument to his helplessness, a steel cage in the middle of nowhere. He was no longer just a witness to the haunting. He was the target, and the entity had just begun to play its cruel game, a psychological torment designed to break him. His mind, already frayed by fear and exhaustion, began to unravel, the carefully constructed dam holding back his past crumbling under the relentless assault. The desert night, the isolation, the relentless torment, it all conspired to break down the walls he had built around his past, to force him to confront the very thing he had spent years trying to outrun. A vivid, agonizing flashback slammed into him, so real it felt like he was reliving it, every detail, every agonizing second. He was driving. It was a dark, rainy night, just like this one, the wipers struggling against the deluge, a futile attempt to clear the blurring world. Sarah, his wife, was beside him, her voice sharp, laced with frustration, a tension in the air that was almost palpable. "John, please just listen to me. You're driving too fast." His daughter, Lily, was asleep in the back, her small, innocent face a picture of peace, oblivious to the storm brewing in the front seat. He remembered the argument, the heated words, the stubborn pride that kept him from admitting he was wrong, from simply slowing down. He remembered turning to look at Sarah, just for a second, to retort, to defend himself, to assert his control. And in that second, that fatal, unforgivable second, the world exploded. The blinding flash of headlights, the screech of tires, a sound that tore through the night, the sickening crunch of metal, the shattering glass that rained down like deadly diamonds, the smell of rain and burning rubber, and something else, something metallic and sweet, the scent of blood. He remembered the silence that followed, a silence far more terrifying than any scream, a void where laughter and life had once been. He remembered Lily's doll, a small pink rabbit, lying in the shattered glass, its button eyes staring blankly at the rain-soaked sky, a silent witness to his failure. He remembered Sarah's hand, cold and still in his, the warmth gone, replaced by an icy finality. The guilt, a crushing weight, had been his constant companion ever since, a silent passenger on every lonely mile, a shadow that clung to him, refusing to let go. The memory faded, leaving him gasping for breath, tears streaming down his face, his body racked with silent sobs. He was back in the cab, the oppressive darkness surrounding him, But the emotional impact of the flashback was as real as the cold seeping into his bones, a chilling reminder of his personal hell. The entity wasn't just haunting the highway, it was haunting him, dredging up his deepest regrets, his most profound sorrows, twisting the knife in his already wounded soul. And it was just getting started, savoring every drop of his anguish. The ghostly apparitions became more personal, more tormenting, tailored to his specific pain. He saw her then, in the reflection of the window, a faint, translucent image, shimmering like a heat haze. Sarah. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a profound sadness, a mixture of love and accusation, a silent judgment that pierced him to the core. She didn't speak, but her presence was a silent scream, a constant reminder of his failure, of the life he had destroyed. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing her away, begging for oblivion. But when he opened them, she was still there, a silent judge in the glass, her spectral gaze burning into his soul. Then he heard it, Lily's voice, calling for him. "Daddy? Daddy, where are you?" It was distorted, ethereal, filled with a pain that tore at his soul, a sound that ripped through the fabric of his sanity. It wasn't the sweet, innocent voice he remembered. It was a voice twisted by suffering, a child's cry from beyond the grave, a tormenting echo of his greatest loss. He covered his ears, shaking his head, trying to block out the torment, to silence the voices, but the sound penetrated, echoing in the deepest recesses of his mind, a relentless, agonizing symphony of his guilt. He slammed his fist against the dashboard, a desperate act of defiance, a futile attempt to fight back against the unseen. "Leave me alone! Leave them alone!" He roared into the empty cab, his voice hoarse with anguish, raw with despair. But his plea was met only with the mocking silence of the desert, a silence that seemed to absorb his cries, leaving him utterly alone. He looked out the windshield, his eyes scanning the darkness, a desperate hope that the sun would rise, that this nightmare would end, that he would wake up from this living hell. But the night stretched on, endless and unforgiving, a black canvas for his torment. Then he saw it again, the muscle car, the beat-up Ford Mustang. This time it wasn't parked. It was moving, slowly, deliberately, pulling up alongside his truck, its dark silhouette a menacing shadow against the faint glow of the distant stars. Its engine purred, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the ground, a predatory rumble that promised violence. John's blood ran cold. He didn't want to look, but he couldn't tear his eyes away, compelled by a morbid fascination. The driver's side window was down, and he could see the figure clearly. It was a dark, shadowy silhouette, indistinct, yet undeniably present, a formless horror given shape. And its eyes, two pinpricks of glowing, malevolent red, burning like embers in the darkness, fixed on him. A gaze that pierced through his very being, stripping him bare, exposing his every fear, his every regret. They were the eyes of pure, unadulterated evil. The figure slowly raised its arm, a skeletal hand emerging from the darkness, and pointed a long, bony finger directly at him, a silent accusation. A wave of icy despair washed over John, a suffocating dread that stole his breath, a profound sense of hopelessness, of being utterly, irrevocably lost, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. In a sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline, a flicker of defiance in the face of overwhelming terror, John grabbed the CB microphone, his hand shaking, and yelled into it, his voice raw with defiance, a desperate roar against the encroaching darkness. "All right, you've had your fun, but I'm not going to be your plaything. You want to scare me? You're going to have to do better than that. I've seen scarier things in a truck stop bathroom." He paused, panting, his eyes still locked on the terrifying figure in the Mustang, a defiant glint in his own eyes. "Seriously, have you seen some of those places? I once saw a toilet that looked like it had fought a bear and lost. And the smell. Don't even get me started on the smell. So, yeah, you're gonna have to step up your game, buddy. You're not getting a rise out of me." He even managed a strained, humorless laugh, a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of control, to inject a moment of human absurdity into the supernatural horror, to prove to himself, if no one else, that he wasn't completely broken. But the entity was not amused. The glowing red eyes in the Mustang intensified, burning brighter, hotter, and a low, guttural growl emanated from the car, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very air, a warning, a promise of retribution. Then, the truck itself began to respond, as if possessed by an unseen force. The steering wheel, without John's input, began to turn, slowly at first, then with increasing force, pulling against his desperate grip. He fought it, straining every muscle, his arms aching, but it was like wrestling with an invisible giant, a force beyond his comprehension. The radio, which had been silent, suddenly blasted to life, not with static, but with a cacophony of screams, distorted and agonizing, a chorus of tormented souls, a symphony of despair. He tried to turn it off, to change the station, to silence the voices, but the controls were unresponsive, dead to his touch. The doors, with a series of unsettling clicks, locked themselves, then unlocked, then locked again, a mocking rhythm of his imprisonment, a cruel game played by an unseen hand. The truck, his sanctuary, his home on the road, had become a cage, a prison of steel and glass, and the ghost was in the machine, its malevolent will controlling every function. He was trapped, a prisoner in his own rig, at the mercy of an unseen force that reveled in his torment, that fed on his fear, growing stronger with every beat of his terrified heart. The truck lurched, then shuddered, as if an invisible hand had slammed it into gear. The engine, which had been dead, roared to life, a terrifying, unholy sound that echoed through the cab, a mechanical scream. John's eyes widened in horror as the accelerator, without his foot on it, pressed itself to the floor, pinning him against the seat. The truck surged forward, tires spitting gravel, hurtling down the highway at a terrifying, uncontrollable speed, a runaway beast. John fought the steering wheel, pulling, pushing, twisting, but it was locked, unresponsive to his desperate efforts, a solid, unyielding barrier. He was a passenger in his own nightmare, a runaway train on a track to oblivion, a helpless victim in a cosmic game. He glanced at the speedometer, watching the needle climb, faster and faster, a blur of numbers, a terrifying countdown. The desert landscape whipped past, a dark, indistinct smear, a blur of shadows and fear. He was on a collision course, but with what? The road ahead was empty, a black void stretching into infinity, a path to nowhere. Then, in the distance, a faint shimmer. It grew rapidly, coalescing into a terrifying reality. A massive spectral roadblock, a pile-up of phantom cars, their forms translucent, shimmering like heat haze on the asphalt, yet undeniably solid, undeniably real. They were mangled, twisted wrecks, burning with an ethereal, green fire that cast an unearthly glow on the surrounding darkness, illuminating the horror. Headlights, ghostly and unblinking, stared out from the wreckage, like the eyes of 1,000 dead souls, watching him, waiting for him. John screamed, a raw, guttural sound torn from his throat, as his rig, possessed and unstoppable, hurtled towards the fiery, spectral barrier. The endless highway had become a tunnel of terror, and he was at its mercy, rushing headlong into the heart of the haunting, towards an impact that promised not just death, but an eternity of torment. He braced himself for the inevitable, the final, terrifying impact, knowing with a chilling certainty that this was the end of the line, the final destination on the endless highway to hell. The spectral roadblock loomed, a terrifying wall of burning, phantom vehicles, growing larger with every terrifying second. John squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the impact, the inevitable, fiery collision that would end his nightmare. He felt the truck shudder, a violent tremor that ran through the chassis, then a blinding flash of light, so intense it burned through his closed eyelids, searing his vision with an unearthly brilliance. A deafening roar, like 1,000 engines screaming in unison, filled his ears, a cacophony of tormented metal and spectral anguish. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was gone. replaced by an absolute, profound silence, a void that swallowed all sound, all fear, all existence. He opened his eyes slowly, cautiously, half expecting to see twisted metal and ethereal flames, to be engulfed in the fiery embrace of the spectral pileup. But there was nothing. The roadblock was gone. The highway stretched ahead, empty and dark, just as it had been before, a silent, unassuming ribbon of asphalt. His truck, miraculously, was no longer hurtling towards oblivion. It was idling peacefully on the side of the road, its engine a soft, reassuring purr, a gentle heartbeat in the vast quiet. The terrifying, unholy sounds had vanished, replaced by the gentle whisper of the desert wind, a soft sigh that carried the promise of a new beginning. And in the distance, a faint, almost imperceptible glow on the horizon, a delicate brushstroke of orange and pink against the inky blackness. The first blush of dawn. John slumped back in his seat, his body a trembling mess, his mind reeling, struggling to reconcile the terrifying reality of the past hours with the sudden, inexplicable calm. He was alive. He had survived. The terror of the night, the relentless torment, the confrontation with his deepest fears, it had all culminated in that blinding flash, that deafening roar, and then nothing. Just the quiet hum of his engine and the undeniable, tangible promise of a new day. He was emotionally and physically drained, every muscle in his body aching, every nerve ending frayed. But he was alive, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope, a fragile ember in the vast darkness of his despair. He looked at his hands, still trembling slightly, then at the steering wheel, the familiar worn leather a comforting presence. He was still here. He was still John, and he had a delivery to make. He started the truck, the engine roaring to life with a familiar, comforting growl. He pulled back onto the highway, heading east, towards the rising sun, towards civilization, towards a future that suddenly seemed less bleak, less haunted. The desert, once a menacing maw, now felt like a silent, watchful guardian. Its vastness no longer oppressive, but liberating. The shadows, once alive with unseen horrors, now receded, vanquished by the encroaching light. He drove, not with the frantic desperation of a man fleeing his demons, but with the quiet determination of a survivor, a man who had faced his fears and emerged, battered but unbroken. The road ahead was still long, still uncertain, but for the first time he felt he could face it. He had a story to tell, a chilling tale of the endless highway, a haunting that had almost claimed him. But he had survived, and as the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in hues of gold and amber, John knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that he was finally, truly, on the road home. The haunting was over, but the memory, the chilling echo of the endless highway, would forever be etched into his soul, a silent testament to the night he faced his deepest fears and lived to tell the tale.